Okay, so a lot of free agency signings went down yesterday, and I'm not going to lie, a lot of them are pretty bad. A lot of them were massive overpayments with the salary cap going up. Teams were spending money left and right, and there really just wasn't a ton of free agents, so teams had to overpay to get guys, considering there's only a limited amount of like first, second liners, top pair, second pair. So today, I wanted to go through what I think are the 10 worst free agency signings. I think 2 or 3 of these are like straight up horrendous. Then there's just some pretty bad deals, way too much term, way too much AAV. So we're going to go through it right now, and I'm going to give you my reasonings. We're going a little pessimistic today. Yesterday on my Instagram, I posted my top 10 ones. Feel free to go check that out. But let's get into it. At first, the worst one, I think this is pretty consensus. Chandler Stevenson getting 7 years at $6.25 million. I predicted him to go to like the Columbus Blue Jackets, my prediction, like to a team that's on the come up on like a 3 to 4 year deal at around 5.5. So the fact that Seattle went so aggressive to give him 7 years at 30 years old at $6.25 million. And yes, he was a 65 point guy last year, but this year had just 16 goals, 35 assists, and 51 points. So he had a down year on top of entering his 30s at $6.25 million. And the Seattle Kraken are known to have some of the best young forward prospects in the entire NHL. I'd say that the likelihood of him seeing the 5th year of this contract on the Seattle Kraken, I think I would genuinely have below 50%. I don't get this big signing by the Seattle Kraken. They yet again go out and get another guy. It's reminiscent of a Philip Grubauer, giving him a massive bag despite being like 28, 29 years old. Not a fan of this, but I think that I'm not really shocking anybody by saying that this Chandler Stevenson one is bad. So let's move on. Another one that I think people agree is pretty bad is Joel Edmonson to the LA Kings. 4 years, $3.85 million. He's 31 years old. He's slow at this point. Yes, he's a physical guy that can lay a lot of hits, but when looking at it, offers virtually no offense at 6 points in 54 games. That's just he's a strictly defensive defenseman, and at this point, he's not even that good defensively. He's not even that good. He has definitely lost a step since his time with the St. Louis Blues or even the Montreal Canadiens. So when looking at this for the Los Angeles Kings, they let a guy like Matt Roy go and instead bring in Joel Edmonton. That is a massive downgrade. Again, Matt Roy, yes, he's making $2 million more, but yeah, I think the gap between those two players are $3 to $4 million. So when looking at the LA Kings, I think that they overall had a pretty brutal free agency. You can make an argument that Warren Fogel's deal should be on this. I personally did not go with it just because it's only 3 years, $3.5 million. He can be an okay around 40-point guy. But when looking at the LA Kings, this is just a big head scratcher. Maybe they want to get physical so they can potentially bully around the Edmonton Oilers. But at the end of the day, because they just lost the Edmonton Oilers for the 3rd straight year. But at the end of the day, they need to bring in some offensive flair, and Joel Edmonton is clearly not that. And considering this deal is going to take him to 35 years old, it's probably going to be an utter disaster. At third, I had a deal that kind of came out of nowhere, and that is Yakov Trenin. Yakov Trenin signed a 4-year deal at $3.5 million. I think he's a very good bottom sixer, but this gives me Barclay Goodrow vibes in the sense that Barclay Goodrow is better offensively than Trenin. He only had 17 points in 76 games this year, has a career high of hitting 24 points twice. Again, he's very good defensively, but to give him this much term at $4 million in this high of an AAV at $3.5 million, just a really head-scratching decision by the Minnesota Wild. When looking at how cap tight they were to go out and identify Trenin as their number one target and massively overpay for him, I think this is going to be looked at as a pretty bad deal right out of the rip. He's going to be a solid bottom six guy, but at $3.5 million, I don't know how they could not promote from within to kind of fill the role that he's aiming for, or the fact that they have a bunch of solid young forward prospects that should be ready to go. I don't know why instead they didn't just sign someone to like a 1-year deal, 1 or 2 year deal. Trenin isn't old. He's 27. I think he's going to turn 28 at like the start of the year. But still, I really do not see any value potentially coming out of this deal, given his such a low offensive ceiling. I understand the importance of bottom six defensive players, but you saw with the New York Rangers, they paid a premium for that a couple off seasons ago, and it turned out to be one of the worst deals. Not 6 years, only 4 years, but $3.5 million is far too much for Yakov Trenin. Next up, Brady Shay, 7 years, $7 million. Shay had a career year, 47 points, but he just turned 30 years old. I think that he's going to be a solid player on the Nashville Predators behind Roman Josi on that second pair. I believe he's left-handed. So in looking at it, career high year, contract year. They overpay for this. Maybe the first couple years he could be worth $7 million. He could be staying that around 40-ish point range. But then once he gets to 32, 33, I don't think that he's going to age like a Roman Josi. So you're going to have a guy on his final 4 to 5 years of this deal probably only be a $5, maybe $6 million defenseman. Massive overpayment right now for a guy that outside of last year really has not ever been worth $7, maybe even $8 million. So when looking at this, they had to pay a premium to get him. But shortly after, this deal is going to be looked at pretty bad. If the Nashville Predators are not a good team the next 1 or 2 years, this is going to be an absolute disaster. Elias Lindholm, fifth worst deal, 7 years, $7.75 million. When looking at this, Bruins fans are convincing themselves that he's going to return to 2022 form. And while it is true, well, he was so good in 2022, mainly because he was playing with Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau, who were both top 15 players in the entire NHL that season. Johnny Gaudreau, top 5, arguably. And yes, he probably will play with David Pastrnak. I'm sure his overall points are going to go up, but I think this guy was always pretty overrated on the defensive end. Solid defensive center, but especially in recent years, his defensive play has gone down. This most recent year offensively, only 44 points. So I think he's going to put up solid numbers just because he's going to have to be their number one center. But is Elias Lindholm anywhere close to a legit number one center? No, not at all. Last year, he wasn't even that good of a second line center. So to give this guy at 7 years old, who's 29 years old, I believe, turning 30 next season, I don't like it one bit. I do not like this deal one bit. I don't think it's like horrendous as like the top 3. Maybe he can turn it around and be a solid guy. But similarly to Brady Shay, I think you're lucky if the first 3 years of this deal he's worth around 7.75. It's not legit number one center money, don't get me wrong, but it's low-end number one money that they gave him, or high-end number 2. So I think looking at Lindholm, considering the trajectory that he's been on, I do not like this. I do not like this. He may be an upgrade over Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle, but he is not close to a legit number one center. I probably would have went down some type of trade avenue. I know they don't have a ton of assets, but more of a trade value in order to get that potential number one than overpay for Elias Lindholm on the open market. Next up, Steven Stamkos, 4 years at $8 million. This is an overpayment, man. I'm happy that Tampa, well, I'm not happy because I want Tampa to not be that good, but Tampa was right to not give him some type of deal with like this. He's 34 years old, and his even strength numbers were very concerning last year. Yes, he had 40 goals and 41 assists, but when looking at it, 39 out of his 81 points came on the power play. When looking at players that scored at least 50 points, that was the 4th highest power play point percentage of their points overall that came on the power play. And among the guys with at least 65 points, it was by far the most in the entire NHL. His underlying numbers and just his regular numbers in terms of even strength production were not that impressive. He was just playing on the power play that was by far the best in the entire NHL. The Tampa Bay Lightning were converting at a 29% clip. That's one of the best in the entire 21st century. It's not as good as the Edmonton Oilers the prior season that were like 31, 32%. But they had an amazing power play, and Steven Stamkos really feasted on that. I'm not sure Nashville's power play is going to be nearly as good. So I think next year, I think he can be like a 35 and 35 guy next year for Nashville. But that's like barely even worth $8 million in today. That's like roughly worth $8 million. And again, that's 34 years old. He's only going to go down from here. So I'm not a fan of it. He's obviously no longer a number one center. He's probably a second line winger at this point, given the trajectory and given the role that he played on Tampa Bay. So I'm not a fan of it, although I do agree that it makes them better. He's still a good player. I'm not trying to say that Nashville fumbled by getting Brady Shay and Steven Stamkos. They're good players, but objectively, the contracts are pretty big overpayments. You got to separate the two. They got better, bad contracts. Next up, we got a little bit of a two-pack. We got the Matt Dumba and the Ilia Lindholm deals at, 7 and 8. When looking at these two, they bought out Ryan Suter. You got really excited. You thought they were going to re-sign Chris Tanev. End up trading Chris Tanev. You think there's still some solid right-handed shot defensemen on the market that they can maybe go after. And then the total haul is Matt Dumba at 2 years for $3.75 million and Ilya Lyubushkin for $3.25 million. $7 million combined committed to these guys over the next 2 years. They're just big, physical, slow defensemen at this point, don't really generate a ton of offense. So when looking at the Dallas Stars heading into next season, it's those two guys. Nils Lundqvist got re-signed for like 1 year at 1.25. He's not that good. So they have basically a 3-man defense core. It's very disappointing what they're going to bring into next season. It's literally just Miro, Thomas Harley, Esa Lindell at this point. I'm very disappointed in Jim Nill. Fantastic with the Matt Duchene signing, so I can't say that they like completely fumbled free agency, but these two moves were very concerning and very backwards thinking. I thought they should have somehow found a way to lock up Chris Tanev, even if it was a longer-term deal. just very disappointing, and their right side is a pretty big weakness heading into next season, considering the fact you're going to have to give Dumba and Leushin pretty sizable roles next year on your team just out of necessity. Last year, they in the playoffs, they only ran out like 4 defensemen for the most part. They had Petrovic as like number 5 that barely even played. It's going to be very interesting to see in Dallas next year. Zadorov at 9. Zadorov, 6 years, $5 million. Far too much term for a guy that's 29 years old, as well as $5 million. Not ridiculous. A 4 to 5. I think like the perfect contract for him would have been 3 to 4 years at 4 to $4.5 million. So I don't hate this as much as maybe some other deals. I think he's going to be a solid Boston Bruin. He plays Boston Bruins hockey, I suppose, but considering the fact that he doesn't offer a ton of offense, yes, he's a solid physical guy, does take some penalties. I think that this is just a little bit of an overpayment. It's not massive. I expect Jim Montgomery to use him effectively, but I think objectively, you can't say that this is like a good contract by any stretch. This is serious second pair money on a 6-year contract for a guy that is probably closer to falling off than reaching some type of prime. I think we can all agree on that. And then lastly, I have the Sean Monahan signing, 5 years at $5.5 million. If an actual like highly competitive team offered Sean Monahan this, if he went to the Nashville Predators per se, I wouldn't like it, but I'd be like, that makes sense. For the next 2 to 3 years, I think Sean Monahan can be worth around $5.5 million. Last year, he had 26 goals, 33 assists for 59 points. But for Columbus, it's just a weird fit for me, considering the fact Columbus is probably not going to be a playoff. After what the offseason that they had, they're not going to be a playoff team next year. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team after that. So when looking at a guy like Sean Monahan that turns 30 in October, maybe they get some solid value the first year or two on this contract. But once they're actually a competitor, once Lindstrom comes up, once Jiricek and Matejchuk really develop, he's going to be a net negative asset between the ages of 32 through 34, making this $5.5 million. So I don't hate the deal itself. I more so hate the fit, given this contract, given Sean Monahan, he also has a decent amount of injury risk. So overall, I'm not a fan. But yeah, this is the top 10. Stevenson, Edmonson, Trennan, Shay, Lindholm, Stamkos, Dumba, Leushin, Zadorov, and Sean Monahan. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? I know that people are going to say like the San Jose Sharks signing Tyler Toffoli. That's more of like a mentorship signing just to give Celebrini someone to play with. The Chicago Blackhawks maybe overpaid for some guys, but that was on like 1 to 2 to maybe 3-year deals to give Bedard guys to play with until the prospects are ready. Those, once you apply the context, there might be overpayments, but given the fact that they're not trying to win immediately, I can't really hate those deals. So yeah, let me know in the comments. What do you think? What do you think of the worst contract signed thus far? And I'll be seeing you in the next one.